The BYU football program holds senior day tomorrow as UCF is in town to take on the Cougars, and the Cougars know all they got to worry about now is winning.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now America's #1 sports podcast network. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider, your host here on this show, and as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Coming up on today's show, we're going to preview BYU and UCF. What do I make of this matchup? How do I think it's going to go down at Lavelle Edwards Stadium tomorrow morning? We'll get into that. Then we're going to talk some BYU basketball. Big win over Miami yesterday, gearing up for a matchup against the pressing Dayton Flyers. We'll talk about all that, and then we'll finish up today's show as we always do on a Friday with our Locked On Cougars Insider Group weekly Q&A. All right, so let's dive right in on today's show. And BYU goes into senior day tomorrow, coming out of a 6-game gauntlet they had called the toughest stretch in BYU football history. That was mostly attributed to Aaron Roderick as BYU's offensive coordinator. And to BYU's credit, they went 5-1 in that stretch. Pretty impressive stuff, considering any which way you want to dice it, that BYU went through a pretty incredible stretch and came out of it on the other side as true conference contenders. Now, BYU faces the reality of the college football playoff, essentially telling them the only way you're getting into this field is if you win out. And that includes a win against UCF tomorrow and ultimately a win in theory next week in the Big 12 title game against Texas Tech. The interesting part about this game tomorrow is that by the time BYU gets ready to go to bed tonight, they could know that they're already going to Arlington, Texas, because all they have to have happen to clinch their spot in Arlington is to have Arizona State lose to Arizona tonight in the Territorial Cup down there in the great state of Arizona. If ASU loses, BYU knows they're going to Arlington. How would that change their whole mindset going into this game against UCF? That's anybody's guess, but BYU cannot afford to lose a game, no matter how little the stakes may be on it, speaking of this UCF contest, because as we have seen from this playoff committee, BYU, it sure looks like from the comments we've heard, the way that they've been treated in these polls and the like, is that BYU has to essentially win their way into the field. And that's unfortunate because I've argued earlier this week, for any of you who are everydayers, that BYU is a potential 11-1 conference runner-up in the Big 12 conference. For them to have to think that they have to essentially win to get into the field when other two-loss teams are sitting right in front of them in the rankings and look like they're all but set to make the playoff, that's disappointing. It truly is. But BYU knows what they're capable of, and it starts off with the UCF Knights tomorrow. UCF is almost a 3-score underdog in this game, and that feels about right for BYU going into this one, because while UCF is fighting for bowl eligibility, and they're going to come in extra motivated, I'm sure, to extend their season by another game to be able to play in a bowl game, BYU has the same motivation, knowing that they can't afford to lose this game, and in some aspects, they need to pile up the points against the Knights. And that's not Kalani Sitake's style. He has been very adamant that style points are not his thing, and nor have they been at any point during his coaching career at BYU, despite him having now his 4th 10-plus win season in the past 6 years alone. It's never really been a hallmark of what Kalani Sitake has done. They play tough, physical brand of football, and that is kind of the hallmark of what BYU is all about, that you're going to feel BYU. They're not going to go out there and put up a bunch of gaudy statistics. They've done it at times. Sure, they've had some great quarterbacks in this run for Kalani Sitake. Look at the Zach Wilsons, the Jaron Halls, even Jake Retzloff leading them into 11-2 last year. This year, the Bear Bachmeier story. It's been a lot of good football played under Kalani Sitake in this run, but it's never been at the expense, in his mind, of costing BYU its reputation, speaking of a team that's chasing points. And it kind of stems, I think, from Kalani Sitake's time playing and being mentored by Lavelle Edwards. Now, LaVell Edwards had some pretty prolific offenses and had games where it got out of hand for BYU. There was a 83-7 demolition at one point over UTEP for the BYU football program when LaVell was the head coach. Famously angered Wayne Howard, the then Utah head coach, when he put Mark Wilson back into a game to chase the single game passing record. Okay, there were moments like that, but by and large, does anybody think of the LaVell Edwards era as him running up the score on their opponents? No. And that's kind of the same way that Kalani Sitake is going to approach this coming into this UCF game. If BYU is afforded the opportunity to pour some on, I'm sure that the players will not hesitate to do that. But I also do have kind of in the back of my mind, let's say ASU does lose tonight and BYU knows that they are going to Arlington irregardless of the result. Do they rest guys? Do they take guys a little out of this game early? And if you've seen the injury report, Chase Roberts is doubtful for this game. And I fully expect that he wouldn't play in this game, with the whole thought that him pulling himself out of that Cincinnati game with that hamstring injury is like, hey, I need to rest up and in theory be available next week in that Big 12 title game. Could that happen for guys like an LJ Martin, who is clearly not 100%? And even though he's been running roughshod last week in particular against Cincinnati, do you kind of protect him from himself if you get this game well in hand? Maybe by halftime, you say, hey, take those pads off. You're sitting out the second half. I don't know. I really don't know how BYU will approach this game. And in some ways, I don't think they know how they're going to approach it, because they just don't know what the result is going to be, whether they need to win and get in, or if they've already clinched their spot in Arlington. That's kind of the dynamic at play here. But I do expect UCF to come in and give BYU everything they've got, because, as I said, UCF, they're one game away from bowl eligibility. They are one game away from being able to play an extra game. And ultimately, I think by any measure, in the first year of the Scott Frost second tenure in Orlando, that would be considered a success to have a bowl season under your belt after year one. That would show that Scott Frost came in and did some very, very good things year one. So I do expect a good game. I do expect UCF to give BYU everything that they can muster, but I also think that BYU is head and shoulders the better football team right now, and therefore should be able to roll to a victory and do it by multiple scores. We'll see how it all plays out, and I'll give you my prediction right now. I've got BYU winning this game 31, UCF 17. I think that's kind of where it shakes out here. BYU wins by 2 scores. Maybe it doesn't cover the spread, but still at the same time, I do think that they will handle their business, punch their ticket to Arlington, and then begin earnest preparations for a rematch against the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Now, on the flip side, let's say BYU loses this game, then all heck could break loose with regards to 2 lost tiebreakers and the like. So it's very, very interesting, and that's also assuming that ASU beats Arizona. Let me be very clear about that. Lot of moving parts, but at the same time, I think BYU's got a very clear message being sent to them by the College Football Playoff Committee is, hey, win your way in. Otherwise, don't bother. It's kind of sad to think about that, but everything's there for the taking for the BYU football program, and all it takes is 2 more wins. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk BYU basketball. Got a solid win on Turkey Day yesterday, taking down the Miami Hurricanes. Now they quickly turn around and take on the Dayton Flyers, trying to win the ESPN Events Invitational title, an MTE event. We'll talk about what to make of the game from yesterday and look ahead to tonight's game. We'll do that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Omaha Steaks. Now, the holidays always feel a little bit easier when you have the perfect gift for the person you're thinking of, and Omaha Steaks makes it almost too simple. Whether you're treating yourself this season or sending someone something memorable to family and friends, Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to yours or their door. The best part is this week is the best time to jump in because their cyber sale is here, and the deals are absolutely huge. I have had my in-laws, my mother-in-law in particular, send me multiple Christmas gifts consisting of Omaha Steaks over the years, and I absolutely love it. Incredible food, incredible variety, but more importantly, incredible prices. It's the great kind of gift that brings people together, and you don't need to guess anybody's size when you're trying to do it. That's the best part about this. So take advantage of these unforgettable gifts from Omaha Steaks. Go to omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide, plus an extra 20% off select favorites. That's 70% potentially off during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use the promo code use the promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's $35 off using the promo code COLLEGE at omahasteaks.com. Terms apply. You can see their site for more details. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope y'all are doing fantastic out there. And thank you once again for making Locked On America's #1 sports podcast network. All right, let's talk BYU basketball. Now, yesterday's game against Miami, in the first half, it felt like BYU had a bit of a Thanksgiving Day turkey hangover, because if you watch that game, and a number of you did, because I'm telling you, the crowd shots down there at the ESPN Wide World of Sports complex, I think they call it the State Farm Fieldhouse, there were a ton of blue-clad fans in the stands there. I know some of you that I know personally were there, Travis and the like, so David as well, David Huckvale. So some really cool things happening with Cougar fans showing up in droves to the event, and you could hear them on the broadcast. But the first half, Miami made BYU work for this one, because Miami had a whole intention of making this kind of a grinded out affair. And the first half resembled that. Miami tried to drive downhill and absolutely dominate the rim. They rebounded pretty well in the first half. But what it took in the second half for BYU, I think Kevin Young probably walked into the locker room and said, guys, you're better than this. You're better than those guys. Go out there and get after them. And BYU came out and immediately erased a 4-point deficit at halftime, made it a 4-point lead. And then at one point, I think it was like 6 minutes, like 5 minutes and change. There was a stretch there. BYU made a 13-1 run. And essentially that's all she wrote. They kept Miami at arm's length the entire rest of the game there. Miami's a good team. I think they're going to be one of those teams, kind of like a Villanova. Remember, the Villanova team was kind of brand new in their first game when BYU played in that season opener down there in Las Vegas. Kevin Willard, well, Jay Lucas has the same thing happening with this Miami squad. He was one of 13 Division I basketball programs who did not have a single returning player on his roster when he took the job over. And he's transformed that roster, some pretty good players. And BYU had their work cut out for them. But the nice part was, you got contributions from across the roster for BYU, and it didn't take the big three being the only options for BYU in this game. If you missed it yesterday, Kennard Davis Jr. did return to action after a 2-game suspension after his arrest on suspicion of DUI. I got a text from BYU Sports Information about an hour ahead of kickoff, said, hey, here's a statement, and it said, Kennard Davis is back after a 2-game suspension. Social media erupted. There's a certain fan base who is beside themselves about him being back after a 2-game suspension. The only thing I'm going to say about Kennard Davis Jr. is that I'm sure there'll be more coming out in due time. He does have a court appearance, I believe, in January. But I will also add this. Kevin Young was on the scene very, very shortly after the accident that occurred that ultimately got Kennard Davis in trouble with the law. And to clear up another thing here, this is not Kennard Davis causing the accident. He got hit by another driver, and then officers apparently found him impaired and ultimately arrested him on suspicion of DUI. He was cited and released. He's retained a lawyer. He's pled not guilty to the charges. And we'll see what happens when it comes to the court system in due time. But Kevin Young said it last week that he is intimately aware of everything that happened with regards to the situation involving Kennard Davis Jr. And I'm assuming that Kevin Young shared with BYU exactly what he observed / learned, because, like I said, Kevin Young and other staff members from BYU were on site and saw or understood very quickly, or assessed the situation, understood what went down. And I'm sure in discussions with BYU leadership, I'm sure the Honor Code Office had its say in all of this. And they came to a consensus, at least from what we understand here, that 2 games was good enough. And now Kennard Davis Jr. is back on the court. Does that change your feelings on the matter? I can't answer that for you guys, but that's the gist of what went down with Kennard Davis Jr. And he's back on the floor, and BYU needed him. He led BYU in scoring with 18 points. He was 4 of 7 from 3, 7 of 10 from the field, and I'm sure it felt good for him to be back out there playing with his teammates. I look at this as you get contributions from guys like that. He was chomping at the bit, I'm sure, to play. Now that he's back, he's feeling a lot better about things. Now, BYU's defense, I thought, was pretty solid in this game overall, top to bottom. They ended up 42 rebounds against 39 rebounds. But I'm telling you, in that first half, it felt like it was a decided advantage on Miami's side of things. And I think a lot of it went to Keba Keita, who decided, okay, enough is enough. He had the most blocks in a single game by a BYU basketball player since some guy named Sean Bradley in 1991 against Virginia. When Sean Bradley is the guy that you're looking up to in terms of what you accomplished in a game, hat goes off to you, Keba Keita. He had 7 blocks in the game, 10 rebounds, and 9 of them on the defensive glass. He did a lot of work, especially kind of in that time frame of that first 10 minutes of the second half to help BYU pull away. AJ Dybantsa came alive in the second half after just 4 first half points. He had 16 points. Robert Wright III had 17 points of his own. He had 4 assists. And I look at this as BYU is really, I think, figuring out a nice flow of how things were operating, but it doesn't preclude the fact that another injury hit BYU, and we'll see what happens. Because Dawson Baker, if you didn't see it during the game, tried to stop, kind of a hop stop, and immediately crumpled to the ground. I initially thought he had landed on somebody's foot and turned his ankle. It was very clear very quickly that ultimately it was a knee injury, and it's kind of non-contact, which is usually a really, really bad sign that something more serious than just a simple ankle turn or the like. Best wishes go out to Dawson because he's dealt with numerous foot injuries and other injuries throughout his basketball career in college. And fingers crossed, if at all possible, he gets back on the court relatively soon. But I'm telling you, it was a bad look. So yet again, BYU is going to have to kind of look at their roster configuration because Dawson was thought to kind of be that backup 2-guard slash point guard that could really distribute things and is a really, really phenomenal shot maker. That was the other issue, is losing him. Is what are you going to do now with that second unit? We'll see. I'm very curious to see how BYU handles those minutes, especially with him out, it appears, for an indefinite period of time, if not the season. And that's tough to say because, like I said, that kid's battled back from so many different injuries, and you hope it's nothing that serious. But with non-contact injuries, in my years covering sports, tough ones to look at and say, hey, he's gonna be back very, very soon. So I'll just say that. I'm not trying to speculate on it. I'm just telling you just kind of history and my experience, what it tells me, and the way he was acting in terms of falling and immediately grabbing at that knee. Disappointing stuff. But it was a solid win for BYU. Now they turn their attention to winning an MTE tournament event title tonight when they take on the Dayton Flyers. Now, Dayton, very strong tradition, a very strong program in terms of what they bring to the table, and BYU has some experience against them. Remember the crazy comeback that BYU had, I think it was 3 Thanksgivings ago, against the Dayton Flyers, erasing a 20-plus point deficit to win that game over Dayton in that event. And it was the battle for Atlantis, if I recall correctly. And this is going to be a game that BYU is going to find another look from another team, because Miami yesterday kind of tried to use their size and their athleticism in the paint to dominate BYU, and it worked for a half, and BYU adjusted to it. Well, this one, speaking of Dayton, they're one of those teams that likes to full court press you, and it's not just they full court press when they feel like they have an advantage. They do like the whole game. They press you. And that's going to be interesting to see how guys like Robert Wright, AJ Dybantsa, even Richie Saunders with Dawson Baker out, how they handle that press. And if they can break it more often than not, well, BYU will find themselves in a pretty good spot in terms of being, I think, able to overcome a pretty strong Dayton team. But if you're not, well, then problems are going to arise. And that's another thing about BYU's season to date, is they've been very good about turnovers. They actually had 13, which is a little higher than average in that game against Miami. You'll want to keep that single digits against Dayton, because they feast on turnovers. Speaking of Dayton, that's really kind of how they generate a lot of their offense. And they're 6-1 on the season themselves. They come off overtime victory over the Georgetown Hoyas, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves coming into this game, I'm sure, and thinking, hey, let's knock off number 9 ranked BYU and add a marquee win to our season. Now, it's not they don't have marquee wins. They have beaten the likes of Marquette already. Speaking of Dayton, they beat Marquette on the road 77-71. They have lost to another Big 12 team, though, in Cincinnati 74-62. It's their only loss of the season so far. And I'm sure they'd be absolutely ecstatic to get that win over BYU. But I also don't think BYU is going to overlook these guys. And having to shuffle the lineup, I'm sure it's not ideal to do it on less than 24 hours. No, it's more than 24 hours notice, because it was an afternoon game, and they don't play until 7:30 tonight. That's 9:30, by the way, on the East Coast. But I do think that Kevin Young will have an answer for it, and I'm interested to see just ultimately how the Cougars handle their business going into this game. If they're going to look sluggish out of the gate, or are they going to play with more pep in their step? Kind of what they played. Like the first half, it felt like BYU was kind of playing in mud a little bit, and that's credit to Miami, because Miami wanted to make it a physical, kind of grinded out game, and BYU started running a little bit more in that second half, showing a little more energy. I want to see more of that, especially early on against this Dayton team. And as I said, when they like to press you, you got to be able to counter that with your own. And that means quick passes. You got to be able to move that ball because that's what breaks the press better than anything else. Trying to dribble and break it, that's what they want you to do. They want you to dribble. They want to trap you. And they want to get you in a situation where they can turn you over. So very interested to see how BYU handles this latest iteration of an opponent, because these are all different looks BYU is going to have to deal with in Big 12 play and ultimately in the NCAA tournament. And Dayton, there's a decent chance that's an NCAA tournament team, speaking of just Dayton's history. And these are the type of teams that at lower levels, they'll press you because they see it as a schematic advantage in terms of maybe BYU having more overwhelming athleticism. Well, a way to counter that, well, turnovers and capitalizing on said turnovers. So going to be interesting. I'm curious to see how it all goes down tonight, and we'll see what ultimately plays out on the court down there. And I think it's Kissimmee, if I've got that right. Speaking of where the Wide World of Sports is located on the Disney World property, Walt Disney World property, I should say, down there in Central Florida. All right. So finishing up today's show, coming up next, it's our weekly Q&A. We'll get to as many questions as we have in the time remaining, answering them from our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. A lot of them football, a lot of them basketball, and even some, Turkey Day related ones. We'll get to all that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here and the NBA is back. There's a better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel. They are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Whether you've missed the start of the game or want to just ride the hot hand of the game you're watching, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks and a whole host of other bets out there you can take advantage of. The best part is you can combine those live bets into same-game parlays for a shot at a bigger payout along the way. Keeps every game more exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And even if it's not NBA action you're interested in, NFL, college football, college basketball tonight, BYU versus Dayton. Tomorrow, BYU versus UCF. All that is available to you from our friends over at FanDuel. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com to sign up today and play your game with FanDuel, as they are the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Hope you all are doing fantastic out there. And if you'd like to ask questions on the show, I reserve that right for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group members. And if you want to be a part of the Insiders Group, sign up today. The link in the show notes below is $5 a month to be a part of the group, get inside scoop on all things BYU, and more importantly, support the show along the way. And I will add this: you get 2 full weeks before you charge a single penny. So 2 weeks to really evaluate if it's what you're looking for. So join us today on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, questions coming in this week, and there's a lot of good ones in terms of the situation involving BYU football and where they stand. Well, this is an interesting one. Lauren Smith said, I'm guessing you saw, but online there were some threats made towards Chase Roberts. Says the guy has subsequently deactivated his X account. Any word on those threats? Now, I was sent screenshots of this. I did not see it in the moment, but I will say this. Athletes getting threatened by gamblers and anonymous accounts on social media has been happening for a long time now. And it's unfortunate because it's absolutely horrific stuff. We're talking stuff that they say to these athletes and they threaten to do. In this case, it was essentially insinuated he was going to go to campus and find Chase and harm him. That was the insinuation. That stuff is unfortunate. And from what I understand, it's actually more rampant on Instagram than it is on X, aka Twitter. But yeah, it's horrific stuff. And I'm hoping that whoever did it, they figure it out. Remember, there was the deranged fan down in Emory County or whatever that threatened to bring a gun to LaVell Edwards Stadium. Well, he was arrested by police. So they can find people like this. And I'm sure if they felt it was a credible threat, they will make sure that they will take care of that. Josh, my previous question regarding the future state of the running back room. Well, LJ Martin has a decision to make after the season because he's had an incredible campaign and he has to decide if he wants to go pro and take advantage of his star rising at this point or come back for another year. Let's say he comes back for another year. Well, BYU, for all intents and purposes, is pretty darn set at the running back position with LJ leading the way. Now, if he leaves, that throws the room into a bit of a chaos. Is Sione Moa capable of holding up for an entire season? That remains a big question to be answered. In fact, essentially every running back on the roster has questions about their durability. That's the long and short of it. And I fully expect, let's say LJ does lose, they will hit the transfer portal. They have to. They have to find a capable back to come in. Think of some of the backs of yesteryear in Kalani Sitake's run, the Tyson Williams and the like. They came in and were very, very welcome additions to BYU's roster. And I think that's the way they'd be looking at it, because I just don't see anybody on the roster right now screaming, that's your next bell cow back. Would you like to have found a Tyler Algier on your roster? Yeah, that would be absolutely phenomenal, but those are rare finds, and I don't think that happens right now in this case for BYU. I fully expect them to hit the transfer portal to answer that. David Goodman, Cody Hagen still hampered by injury, and why has his playing time gone down so much? He hasn't really seen a ton of reduction in snaps from my vantage point, and he did play last week, David, so I fully expect that he's back and healthy and ready to go. He's not on the injury report this week, so that's a positive sign. I think it's just a matter of kind of fluctuating up and down. Now, Chase Roberts missing this game, as I expect him to do. That will add more reps to Cody Hagen's play. It ups the reps for Parker Kingston, JoJo Phillips, Reggie Frischknecht, on down the list. We'll see who ultimately gets some extra reps as a result of that, but we'll see where it ultimately goes. Jeff, after we beat Tech in 2 weeks, who will we play in the first round of the playoffs? Oh, you're manifesting this, Jeff. Who will they play? Well, you have to kind of look at it. Where does BYU ultimately end up? Do they end up in the 12th spot? Well, if they're in the 12th spot, they're going to the 5 seed, and that could be somewhere like Oregon. But also could BYU with 2 wins, a win over Texas Tech, vault themselves into hosting a game. If that's the case, I'd love something like because they've said that under their current parameters, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong about this, that Notre Dame cannot host a game just by virtue of the way that they've built the thing when it comes to the college football playoff. I could be wrong on that. I'd love to see Notre Dame and Provo, Utah. Those are just spitballing, just ideas of what I'd like to see. But really, I want to see BYU in the playoff. I don't care. Just get in the playoff and let's see what happens there. That's what I'm interested to see. Josh says, he had this on. I apologize. I know Devon Eck is part of the 2026 class, but who else is out there? Let's check the transfer portal in a few weeks, Josh. I think that's when we'll learn a lot about this. Handful of you asking where I'm going to be during game day on Saturday. I'll be wandering around the stands. I stay up at like different spots. I go up to the Y up on the second level, that main kind of grand staircase area on the southwest side. I like to go up there and hang out. I'll be wandering around, but I will send a note to those who are asking in the insiders group. I'll probably find a spot to perch myself. Maybe I'll throw it out on social media as well if you want to come say hi. But it is always fun to go say hi and see Cougar Nation at large. And a number of you that support the show, it's awesome. Let's see. A fun note, as of recent recruit rankings, BYU is 3 of the top 10 all-time recruits as part of the 2026 class. I think it's all-time speaking for BYU. In Ryder Lyons, Brock Harris, and Bot Mulatalo per 24/7 Sports. And Josh, to your point, pretty incredible how far recruiting has come for BYU, but also shows the power of being at the Power 4 level for BYU. They would not have been able to really sniff, I think, a guy like Ryder Lyons, at least interesting him to come to BYU ultimately because they weren't at the Power 4 level. Now that they are, guys like Ryder Lyons, you mentioned Bot Mulatalo, just like the Brock Harrises, they are interested in BYU because they can play for the school that's affiliated with their Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is those 3 players. They're all members of the faith, and play high-level, top-tier football at that. And NIL doesn't hurt. All that type of stuff doesn't hurt, but it's really fun to see that as well. Let's see. I submitted a question on Dominique McKenzie from Corey here. I haven't heard much about him. Any projections so high for him? How high is his ceiling? Now, that's a great question about Dominique McKenzie. Dominique redshirted last year. He's kind of been playing in a reserve role this year. I think he's seen action in 2 or 3 games, if I recall correctly. Maybe he's seen time and more on special teams. But a guy like Dom, I think, is just kind of patiently waiting his time. He and his brother, speaking of Marcus, are legit speedsters. They're some of the fastest guys on this team. And you hope in time that Dom finally gets his kind of come up and he gets his chance to really show out and see what he's capable of doing on the field. But I think it's probably going to be next year before you see that ultimately come out. Let's see, Guy, what are the chances of LJ and Tanuvasa coming back? Now, that's the interesting part about this. Neither LJ or Keanu Tanuvasa are listed on the senior day list that the media was sent out. Their game notes do not list either Keanu Tanuvasa and LJ Martin as walking for senior day. Does that mean that they won't test the waters? No, they'd actually be smart. You have to test the waters and see what you're capable of. But I think that the chances, if you ask me which are the chances of those two, it's a higher likelihood in my mind right now that Keanu Tanuvasa comes back next year than LJ right now. I think Keanu still can raise his stock a little bit more at defensive tackle, whereas I think LJ with running backs, when your star is burning brightest, you got to take advantage of it because we all know how downgraded the running back position has become in the NFL. It's no longer a premier position like it was 20 years ago. So if you're asking me to pick one of those two, I think LJ's far more likely, not opportunistic, far more likely to leave at this juncture, but we'll see what happens. Okay, Caden, he's got a long question here. He says, is there anybody at all who has a chance to point out in person to the committee's face that they are holding BYU to a different standard than the teams ranked 7 through 10 using metrics and demand an explanation if they say eye test to point out that Bama got destroyed by Florida State and BYU's done nothing but dominate since losing to number 5? I just need the committee to see the hypocrisy and offer a valid reason to leave a one-loss regular season Power 4 team out. Caden, I think you speak for most of Cougar Nation and saying you'd like to see somebody do that. The one person who in theory could do that is none other than University of Utah Athletic Director Mark Harlan. He sits on the committee. He knows BYU's resume, and he saw up close and personal what BYU is capable of doing because they did it to Utah. Is he going to do that for BYU? That part I do not know. So we'll see what happens. I don't see a easy way for a BYU to move forward here right now. Jeff, basketball is great, but football is better. Which one do you prefer? Jeff, I think if you've been paying attention, it's very clear that football is my first joy. College football is my pride and joy. I absolutely love college basketball. It has its place, but I am first and foremost a college football junkie. I watch a whole lot of BYU, obviously, doing this podcast. I watch a whole lot of other local college football programs as well for my radio job. But if you want to ask me what I'm doing in my spare time, if I have a chance to do it, usually watching college football. I really do just love the sport. So football is my baby. Extends to the NFL a little bit too, but I am first and foremost a college football fan. Let's see other questions here. I think we're running out of time here, but let's see. Talking more about the running back position for BYU. Some questions about the CFP. Okay, good, Chris. Brett Yormark's silence on the Big 12 CFP and the Cincy chant is bewildering. I don't know if he's in witness protection or something, but Brett Yormark has been like MIA this week, and I don't get it for the life of me. I wish I had a good answer for you guys on that. It's driven me nuts. I just don't know it. And then final two questions here. Let's see. Okay, David, I got to know your favorite pie, Jake. Now, a lot of you are Thanksgiving traditionalists. I love me some pumpkin pie. Let me be very clear about that. But my all-time favorite pie, sour cream lemon. A lot of you probably haven't ever tried it, and those of you who have, if you know, you know. That's my personal opinion on the matter. I absolutely love some sour cream lemon pie, and it's one of my favorite things to do. And then Andy asked this, when is the last time you laughed so hard you cried? Actually, just yesterday, funny enough, Andy. My wife and I do the really millennial thing of sending each other memes on Instagram. I know it sounds like it's really a millennial thing. Like we see these memes or these skits on Instagram. We just kind of send them back and forth to each other. She sent me one yesterday that I don't know how to describe it other than it's the woes of parenthood, I guess is the best way to say it. And any of you who may have seen it, I think would be laughing, but it hit so close to home. I just couldn't stop laughing. I was crying. So recently as yesterday, Andy. So hopefully that helps answer that question. All right. Thank you to all of you for your questions. Apologies if I didn't get to all of them, but got to wrap things up here and get to bed and get to other things. I got a radio job to do in the morning and the like. So as always, truthfully, thank you for all of your guys' support. I hope you guys had a fantastic Thanksgiving, spending time with family, eating a lot of good food, a lot of pie, watching football, really just doing whatever makes you happy on one of the great holidays on the calendar. But as always, thank you for your support of this podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen today. Go make your second listen today, the Locked On Big 12 podcast with Drake Toll. Drake's absolutely killing it as he always does. Check that out and make sure you subscribe and rate and review that as well as this show. And until tomorrow, we do a postcast kind of like mid-afternoonish once the game's over for BYU and UCF. Come back and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.